everyone, and welcome to the Coin Republic's podcast, Money and Me. We have yet another interesting guest coming in live from Token 2049, Singapore 2025 edition. We have Alexei, who's the co-founder of Build on Bitcoin, that is Bob. And these guys have delved into the space of Bitcoin DeFi. Alexei, welcome to our podcast, and I'd love to know more about you. How did you ended up founding Bob? And if you can talk a little bit more about your journey.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Great to be here. So yeah, I'm Alexei. I'm the co-founder of Bob. I've been doing this for over 10 years now. I got into Bitcoin quite early in 2015 through research. I got really excited about what else we can build with Bitcoin. I'm a computer scientist by trade. Was really excited about IT security, and obviously that community loves privacy, transparency, censorship resistance. And yeah, since then I did a lot of research, wrote a lot of papers, and designed a lot of protocols that focused on expanding Bitcoin's functionality without causing forks. We looked at merge mining, color coins, things that now have become ordinals, and then bridges as well. And ultimately, I met my co-founder when doing my PhD at Imperial College in London. We were the first two guys actually in the university focusing fully on crypto. And we eventually did a spin out and started building products that allow us to bring more Bitcoin users into DeFi. And essentially that's Bob's mission, really bring the next billion people into the on-chain economy. And we think Bitcoin is the best way of achieving that.
Absolutely. For quite a few years, Bitcoin has been overshadowed, especially when we talk about a place where builders can be. A lot of layer 2s came into picture. What are you doing to bring Bitcoin back in style?
That's a very good question. So one of the biggest problems I think that Bitcoin has today is, yes, it has adoption, it's mainstream, right? But you can't do much with it, especially not natively. Bitcoin has no native yield. There is no infrastructure on Bitcoin to do DeFi. And if you want to use it in different DeFi applications, you have to go through more than 1 of 50 different wrappers. Very hard for users. And when we talk to, fintechs, neobanks that have a lot of users and they want to give them access to Bitcoin use cases, for them, Bitcoin DeFi is still too risky. And what we are doing is we are creating essentially a layer, a platform that combines the best of Bitcoin security with Ethereum's DeFi versatilities. And we've combined the best of these two worlds in Bob. And that means Bitcoin security, native Bitcoin deposits. So you don't trust anyone, you don't trust any bridge when you want to use Bitcoin in DeFi in Bob. But at the same time, we have the best infrastructure and tooling that enables real DeFi applications. And for a builder, there is no difference whether you build on Bob, Base, Optimism, Arbitrum, right? So we really abstract the complexity. And this we create an environment that really allows Bitcoin DeFi to flourish. And at the same time, and that's something we launched yesterday, we also are building on top of this infrastructure the gateway for Bitcoin yields. So if you have Bitcoin and you want to use it in DeFi, you should not care on which chain that happens. If you want to go to the most secure place, you'll go to Bob. But if you really just want to experiment, you're open to risk of wrappers and other chains, you just want to go into the app. You don't want to click through different bridges. And that's a new product we just launched called Bob Gateway, which allows you to go from Bitcoin into 11 chains with one transaction, and we're powered by Layer 0 and BitGo.
Definitely solving the problem of interoperability, which has existed in this space for quite some time. If we talk about builders, entrepreneurs, what are some of the incentives that Bob offers as compared to any other gateway, say?
Well, I think on one hand, it's ease of getting started, and you get basically access to Bitcoin tooling out of the box without having to deal with the complexities of Bitcoin infrastructure. So if you're a Bitcoin company, Bitcoin project, you want to build Bitcoin DeFi, if you build on Bob, we'll help you get to market 10 times faster than if you're trying to do it directly on BTC. And in terms of incentives of why you should build here, Bob will use Bitcoin staking to secure the network. And we know that staking has product market fit in Ethereum and Solana. And we also know that liquid staking tokens, LSTs, have a multi-billion-dollar market on Ethereum. Well, we have been positioning Bob as the hub for LSTs. We have some of the deepest Bitcoin LST liquidity on Bob. And the interesting part is that the more DeFi activity there is on Bob, the more fees the chain generates, the more staking rewards go to Bitcoin stakers, which attracts more Bitcoin staking because Bitcoin has no native yield. There is, you don't need 10%. If you can give 1 to 2% staking rewards on Bitcoin, that's massive. That again brings more liquidity, more DeFi activity, more fees, more Bitcoin staking. It creates this beautiful flywheel that allows us to really onboard more Bitcoin liquidity into the system. And that's ultimately the incentive for builders, because if you're building in the space and you want to use Bitcoin LSTs, Bitcoin DeFi, that's the place where you're actually able to capitalize most on this flywheel effect. Whereas if you do this on Ethereum, you don't have these additional incentives, these additional staking rewards supporting your protocol growth.
Absolutely. You've also quite a few times mentioned about Bitcoin security budget, and I'd love for you to detail how the long-term vision aligns with the Bitcoin ecosystem.
That's a very, very good question. There's always been this debate about Bitcoin security budget, and even Satoshi himself said, right, that in the future there'll either be a lot of transactions on Bitcoin or none at all. And you see, yes, layer 2s allow you to do more things, but it's of course off the Bitcoin chain. However, the way Bitcoin staking works, the way the BitVM bridge works, right, there will be continuous transactions on Bitcoin. And at the same time, right, Bob won't be the only layer on Bitcoin. There'll be multiple, just like there's dozens and dozens of layers on Ethereum. When you want to go between them, right, the best way is to use Bitcoin security to rebalance between these different chains. And the more applications and activity we can bring into the Bitcoin ecosystem, the more transactions, the more activity will happen. And Bitcoin, for example, is often used as, the most secure storage for NFTs, real-world assets. So what we can imagine in the future is that a lot of that lives on Bitcoin, but the utility and how actually the DeFi applications live on these layers on top, which, in my opinion, will contribute quite nicely to activity on Bitcoin, more transactions, and of course, hopefully also solve the security budget problem.
Absolutely. When we talk about institutional adoption, of course, it's one of the biggest or key factors that drives successful projects, or even less for that matter. What sort of institutional adoption are we expecting on the Bitcoin ecosystem? We've obviously seen a lot of L2s sort of gear up when we talk about institutional support, but how is Bitcoin ecosystem getting the desired institutional support at the moment?
Well, I think, every institution is looking at Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is mainstream. There's no question, that Bitcoin is cool now. You have banks now trying to sell Bitcoin ETFs to my grandmother.
Right.
What you see happening now is everybody's looking, for ways to put this idle capital to work. Use it as collateral, use it to generate yield. And naturally the question is, where can I find that?
Yeah.
And staking was probably one of the most, hype topics in Bitcoin for a while now. And Babylon got $6 billion of Bitcoin stake, even though it's still getting started and being built out. And we work very closely with them to really, build an economy around Bitcoin staking that generates real staking rewards and native yield. And a lot of institutions have started adopting this. And we see that this is one of the easiest selling points, right? You can use your Bitcoin to secure networks that generate staking rewards. And users know how to stake ETH, they know how to stake Solana. Now you can stake Bitcoin. And then from there, ultimately, you start looking at, what else can they do? You have a lot of neobanks, that offer, for example, cashback in Bitcoin, but they don't want the users to instantly sell it. They want the users to use the Bitcoin, maybe in DeFi as collateral, or put it into vaults that generate returns and, get more sticky users. And they see Bitcoin as, offering products on top of that BTC liquidity that they have as one of these opportunities to, capture more users. So what we see now on the institutional side, and this is matched on the chains and DeFi protocols, is more or less an arms race,
right,
to capture Bitcoin liquidity and build the best way for people to put Bitcoin to work. And as Bob, actually, we've positioned ourselves in a way that we benefit from this growth. We have our own chain, which has the most secure way to use Bitcoin in DeFi. And nobody else can provide that level of security. Like Solana, Ethereum, they're not designed to be as Bitcoin aligned as we are. But at the same time, we realize, Solana, ETH, Aptos, Sui, Polygon, Avalanche, they will all want Bitcoin. And we also work closely with them to provide their users a way to go from BTC into DeFi and back And obviously, when wallets, when institutions look at this, they want a very simple solution. And Bob essentially provides this one place that can integrate and then just get access to all these opportunities without having to deal with a lot of these technical integrations themselves. So I think, it's a mix of course, native yield, secure integrations, and also simplicity that, reduces risk, especially perceived risk for institutions and their users.
Absolutely. Can you also talk about a few projects that are building on Bob? What sort of projects, which sectors do you think this can attract?
So on the Bob chain and the ecosystem, we've seen an interesting development. Bitcoin holders are more conservative in their risk preference. And what we've noticed is that liquidity concentrates within really tier one protocols that people know, people trust. So for example, the biggest DEX on Bob is actually Uniswap. And in terms of TVL, the Uniswap markets on Bob are the fourth largest in across all the deployments they have, concentrated on different Bitcoin primitives, LSTs, and so on. We've had Euler launch on Bob and focus on Bitcoin markets. We've been, working with Aave in their forums, basically developing a Bitcoin strategy. And at the same time, we also see the rise of Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. Especially now in this new stablecoin-driven era, I feel that there's a lot of interest and demand for people to create stablecoins and get access to essentially the dollar without necessarily selling their Bitcoin. And stablecoins, that use Bitcoin as collateral, are just so much more efficient than going into lending markets. Of course, they come with other risks, but what we've seen is essentially a rise of these protocols, and we see them growing actually quite a bit in liquidity on Bob as well. And then when we look at the multi-chain ecosystem, we see really swaps, Bitcoin to any asset, aggregators for yield, where you can just one-click deploy into strategies. That is something that's growing really, really fast and essentially is building on top of the infrastructure we've provided. And what this is gradually turning into is a platform that provides you with all sorts of Bitcoin opportunities, starting from swaps, lending, perps, options, all the way to super advanced strategies that deploy into Hyperliquid and other chains, but it's still only one click for the user.
So for the longest time, of course, Bitcoin was being viewed as just a store of value, a currency, so to say. Why did this adoption in terms of building on Bitcoin came in so late? And where do you think this trend is headed? Are you expecting the narrative to change and more people building on Bitcoin as we move forward?
I mean, that's, again, a very good question. Bitcoin has always, had a lot of users, a lot of demand, but there was no tooling, there was no infrastructure in place. It was always very hard to use Bitcoin in DeFi. And also, if you look back in history of Bitcoin, the block size wars when Bitcoin Cash happened, right? Ever since then, there was I would say that kind of started the dark ages a bit, where any innovation was shunned. And if you wanted to do something on Bitcoin, if you wanted to build a layer 2, the core community did not want that. There were deep scars from that infighting. But then over the last 3-4 years, we've seen essentially innovation come back and what we call the Bitcoin Renaissance. You have more people coming back to BTC. There is a lot of technical innovation with staking and BitVM. So I think it was just a matter of time. Also, Bitcoin moves slower, and now there's clear proof that DeFi works, smart contracts work, and ultimately Bitcoin is still the biggest market. And I think it's not unexpected that everything just comes back to BTC.
Of course.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a challenge for the Bitcoin community because again, Bitcoin was great for transfers, you can send it around, but you could do nothing with it because there was lack of tooling. And I think we could have seen much more innovation had there not been this deep conflict that left the Bitcoin community so divided back in the day. And it just takes time, for people to kind of become more open to innovation again. But once you kind of light the spark, then it starts growing exponentially. And if you look at the last 3 years, 2.5 years since ordinals, right? We had ordinals, runes. We've had now an explosion of protocols trying to do native things on Bitcoin. We've had staking. We've had native bridges. We have swaps. We have multi-chain deployments. that all happened in a period of 2 years. You have so many new protocols building in the space. When we announced Bob, we were probably the first team that went out and said, look, Bitcoin Layer 2s are coming back. It's not a solved problem yet. And now there's over 80 protocols doing the same.
Wow. You initially mentioned that the goal is to onboard the next 1 billion users. Of course, that's a very loosely used term, and a lot of entrepreneurs or founders have been talking about mass adoption, bringing in the next billion users. But what drives the vision at Bob, and how are you guys planning to bring in the amount of people that we are expecting?
I mean, naturally, it's a very ambitious vision, but at the same time, right, we're not saying, oh, we're going to go and find 1 billion people that have never used crypto before. We essentially see Bitcoin as the rails, right? Bitcoin has the largest adoption in crypto, right? For the majority of the global population, Bitcoin equals crypto. They maybe know Ethereum, maybe Solana, but anything else, probably never heard of it. And if you think about brand value, and that's super important, you know, in adoption. If you look at the Apple logo, like everyone knows what it stands for. Bitcoin has the same, and you don't need to build a new brand, right? Selling Bitcoin and like the vision of Bitcoin is the easiest thing you can do if you're like trying to get people into crypto. And so what we see, you know, as a huge opportunity is to allow these users to take their BTC and do something with it, and not force them to go to centralized exchanges, but do this in a trust minimized way, in a transparent way that aligns with the values of Bitcoin. Probably in many cases, the reason why they actually bought Bitcoin as an asset. And, you know, that just has not been done before. And I think, you know, if you look at the Ethereum L2 landscape, a lot of the alt L1s that have emerged over the past years, they were all fighting for the same pool of DeFi users that would just move from chain to chain to chain. The capital was just moving around. And now you kind of have these two new avenues. You have stablecoins, right, which is a very fast growing market. And then the other hand, you have Bitcoin. And our vision is obviously to leverage Bitcoin to bring in more Bitcoin holders. But of course, what's the number one use case? Well, it's borrowing stablecoins, like essentially financial interactions between BTC and USD and other fiat currencies, but combined, you know, in the crypto world where everything is composable. You have one account and you can access all the applications. You don't need to worry how to get from platform to platform. And, you know, just like neobanks, you know, had this exponential growth because they provided a better product, we feel that DeFi is a better product. And, you know, making it easy to access for Bitcoin holders, convincing them that there is a secure way to do so, that's probably going to take us to the next step, right? And really help us grow and bring in new users versus, you know, always fighting this challenging battle.
And of course, you rightly said that, you know, Bitcoin and crypto goes synonymously. I mean, my grandmother, for instance, thinks that I work for Bitcoin and not in crypto. But that being said, you've given a really nice idea of the Bitcoin ecosystem. Finally, Alexei, what is the roadmap for Bob? How are you guys planning to expand? Of course, there were new partnerships that came up and a great announcement that came up just yesterday, but in terms of the roadmap, Q4 roadmap as well as a roadmap for the next year, what are you guys planning?
So on the technical side, really getting native Bitcoin deposits and staking live. And on the product side, expanding on this multi-chain product with Layer 0 gateway, adding more partners, more chains, and really adding swaps and one-click Bitcoin integrations with some of the biggest DeFi players in the space. So I mean, that's basically it. We're just continuing to do the same thing and just ship products.
A lot to look forward to, I'm sure. Thank you so much, Alexei, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It was a great chat.